In this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains why people have a hard time in relationships.
Okay, so and then there's this overarching symbol, which is the dragon of chaos, which is potential itself, and it's the potential from which all of these categories emerge. And so the most abstract category of our imagination is that which is beyond our understanding, the category of that which is beyond our understanding. And that seems to me to be represented, because we can only use the representational structures that we evolved, is that it's represented in our paradoxical representation of the predator and the treasure that lies beyond the perimeters of our safe societies. So what's out there beyond? Well, we don't know, but we need to know, because we need always to deal with what we don't know. So weirdly enough, we have to come up with a category of what we don't know in order to start formalizing a theory about how we might progress towards it and interact with it. It's a very paradoxical idea. And there's a paradoxical answer, right? It's the terrible predator that lurks in the unknown that also harbors something of great value. Perfect. Perfect. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think that that is a reflection of the fact that human beings are predator animals and prey animals at the same time. So what's out there in the terrible darkness? Something that can destroy you, but also something that you absolutely need. So how do you prepare yourself for that? And that's the ultimate question of life. It's not how do you deal with death, although death is a subcomponent of the terrible unknown, I would say. It's how do you deal with that which is beyond your understanding, which is constantly manifesting itself in the world. And that manifests itself every time you categorize something and the thing escapes from the category. And that happens most in interpersonal relationships, because people are so damn complicated. You get them figured out and boxed in. You even make a contract that neither of you will jump outside the box, but you jump outside the box continually. And that's why a relationship requires constant negotiation and reconceptualization, because you do not exhaust the person with your perceptual categories. And of course, you don't exhaust the world with your perceptual categories ever. This is partly why the existentialists, they had this concept called alienation, and the idea was that human beings become alienated from their creative products. So, and here's why it happens. So imagine Henry Ford makes the assembly line, right? So Ford has no idea what's going to happen when he makes the assembly line, because he's just trying to figure out a fast way to make cars, or he thinks that what he's making is cars. So he thinks he's making an assembly line for cars, and he thinks he's making cars. And you think, well, what's wrong with that? Well, first of all, the assembly line absolutely transformed the entire planet, right? Because it brought in the era of mass cheap manufacturing. It's like it was way more than he thought it was. And then, did he make a car? Well, a car is something that hypothetically takes you relatively effectively from point A to point B. It was really a replacement for the horse and buggy. I mean, the first cars looked like that. They were horseless carriages. Well, did he make a car? Well, it's hard to tell what Henry Ford made. He made a very effective way for transforming the atmosphere, right? And the fact that it also happened to take you from point A to point B might be just completely irrelevant compared to the fact that it was the internal combustion engine and its rapid distribution completely changed the constituent, the fundamental chemical structure of the atmosphere itself. It completely transformed cities. It blew out the rural community. Everyone moved to the cities, right? It made all the cities built around the automobile. But then it had this tremendous political and economic significance too. So I mean, part of the reason that, because you think, well, a car is a way to get from point A to point B. But no, it's not a machine. It's also the embodiment of an idea. And it's a very strange idea. A collectivist society would have never invented the car, because the car is predicated on the idea that you could own a conveyance that would get only you from somewhere to somewhere else without ever asking anybody for any permission. And so the funny thing is when you build something like that, those presuppositions are built into it. And then when you export that, say to Soviet Russia, they can't just take the car and leave the political implications behind. The car, the mere fact that you step into one and drive it, is an indication that you're accepting the political, ideological presuppositions that are part of the fact that that thing even exists. And so, well, that's alienation. It's like, even something you make, you think, well, you have control over what you make. because you've made it, you understand it. It's like, no you don't. You understand a tiny fraction of it. You launch it out in the world, man, and the snakes inside of it, the hydras inside of it, multiply their heads massively, constantly. And you can't really keep track of it. And so even in your relationship with created entities, you still see the reemergence of this underlying fundamental substructure, right? Even inside, it's the Garden of Eden. There's always a snake inside the thing that's walled in. Always, always, always. Even God himself cannot get rid of the snakes in the garden. And partly what that means is that, you know, the garden is a conceptual system. It's the conceptual system within which people exist. That's Eden is a walled garden. Paradise means walled garden. And it's walled because a walled garden is where people live, because the wall is culture and the garden is nature, and we always live in a structure that's an amalgam of nature and culture. So we set it up so it's paradisal as long as we're unconscious, but we can't manage it because there's always something chaotic that's coming in that we will interact with. That's human beings. You put a snake in the garden, it's the first bloody thing we're going to talk to. And for better or worse, it makes us conscious and awake. It makes us aware of our mortality. It does all sorts of terrible things to us, but it doesn't matter because that's the path that human beings have, what, chosen? Because that's the implication in that story. And it's a very difficult thing to answer, because we certainly choose each other for self-awareness and consciousness and intelligence. And I don't, you know, if you're choosing a mate, there's an arms race in human beings. We're choosing intelligent mates, that's especially the case for women in relationship to men. So that the idea that that's a choice, well, that's partly why it's Eve that makes Adam self-conscious in the Garden of Eden, right? She offers him the apple. She's the one that makes him self-conscious. And I think that's actually accurate, because the evidence from the evolutionary biologists is that female sexual selection was one of the driving factors that differentiated us from chimpanzees. It's a major factor. Chimpanzee females are not selective maters. They go into estrus, they'll mate with anything. What happens is the dominant males chase the subordinate males away, and so they end up leaving more offspring, but it's not a consequence of selection on the part of the females. In human beings, it's completely different. Concealed ovulation and intense selection pressure from women on men. You have twice as many female ancestors as you have male ancestors. And people can never have a hard time working that out arithmetically, but it's not that problematic. You just think on average every woman had one child. Half of men had none and the other half had two. And that's approximately correct if you average across the entire history of human sexuality. So human males in particular are subject to vicious selection pressure on the part of females, and I also think that's partly why nature is represented symbolically as female among human beings, because after all, nature is what selects. There's no better definition of nature than that which selects.